Pastor Rick spoke for the last 8 weeks and other staff on mercy. And it's been a great series. I've loved it. I loved especially last week where we had the testimonies, and Pastor Rick had 6 people up here sharing testimonies, how they reached out into their world and mercifully connected with and brought other people to the mercy of Christ. How many of you saw that last week? That was absolutely amazing. But what I thought about as I heard those testimonies is they all had one thing in common. And that was they didn't bring those people home with them permanently with a wedding ring on, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Home is the hardest place to show mercy. It's the very hardest. Why is that? It's because I know you the best, and I know your weaknesses, and I know your shortcomings, and I know everything about you, that all the broken parts. If you're a stranger, you haven't hurt me. If you're a stranger, I can give empathy to you because you've not hurt my feelings or disappointed me. You've had plenty of opportunity to hurt my feelings and or disappoint me, as I have you. Those closest to us are the hardest to show mercy. Now, whether you are married or single, here with someone or alone or with friends, I want you to be thinking of your significant close relationships, because it is at these closest places, with our parents, our children, those closest to us, it's the hardest place to show mercy. We didn't know how to show mercy to each other in the first part of our marriage. We had to learn, and today we're going to take you on a path toward mercy.
So why is it so hard to show mercy to our spouse? Well, because we're exposed. When you think about it, when you live with somebody for a number of years, they start to know you inside and out. They start to see the parts of you that maybe they didn't see when you were dating. And mercy is the hardest to give because our partner is going to wound us. And they're going to disappoint us. And so it's hard for us to say, well, I want to be merciful to you when I feel hurt or I feel wounded. And with familiarity, we take liberties, don't we? I mean, we let our guard down at home. It's our spouse and our kids who really see the worst of us, not the best of us. And so that's why it's hard to show mercy in our marriage.
You know, you just brought up a good point. At home, it's what we call behind closed doors.
Right.
We all have a public facade. We all have something we show to everybody that we see out here. But what happens behind closed doors? And our journey was entirely behind closed doors of how we learn to develop mercy toward one another. The growth path toward mercy in marriage has several steps. We're going to share with you our journey that we went through and share with you the story of how we got from a place where we couldn't see each other and we were irritated by each other because of closeness into a place where our marriage has become the throne of grace and mercy to one another. Number one, the first item and the first step in this path is we must be willing to enter the mess of both ourselves and the other person, our spouse. In Galatians 3 and Galatians 4, it talks about how Jesus came to redeem us. Do you know what the word redeem means? I went to a school as a little boy called Redeemer Baptist Christian School. What does the word redeemer mean? Redeemer means I'm going to purchase you off of the auction block of sin, and I'm going to come and reclaim you and put you into a special privileged position. And Christ redeems us. And us too, we are to be people who seek to help redeem others if we're going to resemble Christ. Buddy Owens talked about entering into another's pain, to get your hands dirty. Buddy Owens talked about stepping into the brokenness and doing something. Well, it's easier to do if you're the Good Samaritan by the side of the road and that person hasn't hurt you, you just see them wounded and bleeding. But it's very difficult to do it right here. Rick Warren said, mercy is love in action. Mercy is love in action. Kay Warren said, it's a decision, not an emotion. I have to decide I'm going to redeem, I'm going to love, I'm going to enter the mess, mine and yours.
Yeah, it's really a modeling after Jesus, because Jesus lived in heaven with God in a perfect environment, and he came to this earth, and he entered a very messy place in order to purchase us out. And I think the result of really redemption is freedom, and the result of growth is freedom. And in our marriages, we're going to have to enter the mess in each other's life, and sometimes I would say for the first 15 years, we didn't even know what that mess was.
Nope.
And so God had to first reveal what was broken in us before we could even really begin to heal and fix that brokenness. But it resulted in tremendous freedom. And so the hard work in the end was really worth it, even though there were times it was very, very difficult.
If we were purchased off the slave market of sin, the opposite of being a slave is to be free.
Right.
And we're free. Talk about that miscarriage we
so
had.
just to show you where we were, because, when Milan was a pastor for 10 years, and then we burned out and had a lot of frustration in the ministry, and God took us through 10 years of really deep personal growth. But right at the beginning of that, we had 3 kids, and we decided to plan a 4th, since the first 3 were unplanned, and just to see what that was like.
That's not public information, by the way.
It is now.
Apparently it is now, so.
Anyway.
Just saying.
We planned the 4th, and it took a whole year to really get pregnant when the first 3 were so easy. I don't know what that was about, but I was very excited, and we were very excited about this pregnancy, because it was a difficult time in our life, and it felt like this was just this little treasure from God that I could hold on to and that would bless our family. And about 4 months in, I went to a doctor's appointment, and they said, there's no heartbeat. And I was really, really devastated. And I came home and, told Milan, and I was just struggling with what to do with these feelings, being the avoider, which I'm going to describe in a minute. And I finally, the next day, I called Milan at work, and I said, I'm devastated, I'm mad at God, and I'm just going to go to San Diego and get a hotel room and be myself for a few days, because I need to just have time to process this. And really, we look back on that with a lot of sadness and regret, because I had no idea at that time how to take my emotional pain to really talk about it and bring it to my husband. I didn't even know how to bring it to a friend. I remember a neighbor pounding on the door, just wanting to, probably comfort me, and I didn't answer the door, because I grew up in a home where you didn't show emotions and you didn't cry, and so I was lost as to what to do with those feelings. We didn't even do a good job talking to our kids about that, because especially my daughter was really looking forward to having this little baby in the home. So that's where we started, in a place where we had great difficulty opening up and entering into anything messy, because that was a messy time and we were lost as to what to do.
And if we can't enter into the messiness, then we can't show mercy, can we? Because to look at the wounded man by the side of the road, the wounds are obvious. He was bleeding, he was bruised. All of us in this room have non-obvious wounds. They're all hidden. I can't necessarily see them. But inside, we all have these places of woundedness. And we have to be willing to expose those, explore those, and look into them so that we could have mercy for those places of pain on the inside. Point number 2 is we need to understand the common areas of brokenness in us so we can begin to enter into that mess. What is that mess? Well, I love Romans 12:1 and 2, because it says this. It says, after a beautifully long theological expose in chapters 1 through 11, Paul says, therefore, based upon everything I've said to you, be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This part right here, be not conformed to the world. Don't let the world shape you. And the world wants to shape us with respect to our sinful nature, the flesh. The Apostle Paul talked about himself and he said, look, the things I don't want to do, what did he say? I do them. And the things I don't want to do, yeah, I think I got that backwards, but you got it right, okay? See what I mean? The things we want to do, we don't do. Can't even talk right sometimes. He says, I'm convinced there's this mess inside of me. The wishing to do good, and then there's this other thing inside that's evil and it doesn't want to do what I want to do. There's a weakness that I have. And then we have an enemy. We have an enemy who is Satan. And then we have the world that wants to pull us. And we have this thing says first in 1 John, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the boastful pride of life. There is everything that wants to pull me away from loving God with all my heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it, you should love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my best neighbor, my closest neighbor? My spouse, but that's the hardest place to show mercy. We need to understand the common areas of brokenness that we see at the root of most relational problems. Now, let's take those very important points that I just made about the flesh, the world, sin, Satan. Keep those in mind because every one of those can pull us off. But I want to look at a second point that's a little less obvious, but we find to be quite prominent in our life and in our world of counseling. And that is that the family's role in the shaping of us. Our family made an imprint. And the Bible says, be not conformed to the world, but the very first place that the world shapes you is in your family. And God says, don't allow whatever shaped you to be the thing that is your perpetual shape. Kay talked about being the avoider, which she's going to explain in just a moment. To be an avoider does not resemble Christ. She had to grow up so that that part of her no longer resembled the Lord. So she had to say, I'm not going to be conformed to that part of my shaping. So we want to understand that when there is sin, when there is brokenness in the world, as well as these familial imprints, those are, and they are raging and in full bloom, there's no room for mercy. Because we have to be willing to do something different, which is to look at ourselves and decide we want to grow up and not just stay at the place we were shaped. So you mentioned being the avoider. Tell us what that is.
Okay, God brought attachment theory to me in this place where we were really growing. And as I read it, I realized it was describing the root of our brokenness. And so I feel like God used this material to really help me understand and Milan understand what was at the root of our marriage dynamic that was really frustrating and difficult for us. And when I read about the avoider, I was all over the page. An avoider is someone who is raised in a home like mine, where we just didn't do emotions at all. I was never asked once how I felt. I was never asked to describe my inner experience. I was never asked anything really very personal. Conversation stayed very much on the surface, and it was a lot more about performance than it was connection. I think my mom and dad loved us. I just think they came from families that didn't know how to connect on any kind of an emotional level. So for the avoider, it's a lot more about task and mastery in the home that they grow up in. And just to show you how really early this starts, I'm going to show you a clip that I saw on television right around this time that I was beginning to understand this, and I was mesmerized by it. So let's watch this clip.
Parent and a child, how well they interact, is crucial to the development of a baby's brain. These pictures show what can happen if that interaction is disrupted. They were drawn by 5-year-old twins, identical in every way, except they each had a different birth experience. One had a difficult delivery and was irritable and hard to soothe right from the start. The other, who had no problems at birth, was immediately warm and responsive, making it easier for the mother to interact.
So right at the beginning, one child got all of this consistent, predictable, comfortable stuff from the mother, And every time that happened, a little bit more was built into that child in terms of being able to self-regulate, reinforcing all those good qualities this child had. This child, which was more irritable and fussier, the mother got tense. So by the time these kids were 5, there was a huge difference between the twins.
That clip just captured me, so much so I sent away for it and watched it over and over, and I thought, I'm gonna ask my mom what kind of a baby I was. Never asked her this before. So I said, Mom, what kind of baby was I? How was I as an infant? And she said, oh, you were glum. I said, what? She said, you were glum. Well, I've never heard a baby described as glum. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you just never smiled. She said, you were just kind of really serious, and when you were 8 months old, you fell and trying to crawl into your sister's crib and broke your collarbone, and so I couldn't pick you up because you would cry, and you just kind of glum. I was like, oh my gosh, I think she just explained a feeling I've carried around for a lifetime. And then, as God would have it, and this is how God puts pieces together when you're willing to grow, my sister took all the old movies that my dad had taken when we were little. Not many people were taking movies in 1951, but here's a clip of my twin and I. We're 4 months old. We look a little scrawny because we were 3 weeks premature. And I want you to see if you can tell which one is me. Okay, what do you notice? No eye contact. And my sister is looking at my mom, she's looking at me, she's smiling. And I think that shows you how early, that's where my marriage problem started, right there. I'm not kidding.
We're not kidding.
My early experience.
Look at me, Kay.
That was our core pattern, which we're going to talk about and role play for you a little later. But I learned early on that my mom was anxious. And all that fixing and trying to get me to look at her, she admitted when I talked to her again after this, I said, did I make you anxious? And she said, well, I never thought about it, because she didn't feel feelings either. She said, maybe so. And so right from the beginning, I have this experience where I'm having trouble connecting as an infant. And all those memories are stored on the right side of our brain. They're called implicit memories. And we don't remember them like we remember being 6 and going to Disneyland, but they do come back in body states and body feelings when somebody's doing this to me, even metaphorically. I have an internal response to this day. Now I just know what that response is and why it's there.
That's why he did it to me and not you.
Yeah, he did that to me in a workshop once, and I'm like, oh, you're bugging me right now. So this is where the mess started in me. I didn't really connect to my mom, and we kind of kept that anxious loop going all through my adult life. And when she died, I tried to ask her how she felt about having cancer and, being at the end of her life, and she couldn't really describe how she felt because in my family, we just didn't do feelings. So avoiders, if you ask them how they are, what are they going to say? Fine, because they don't really know how they are inside. And, we think they're being stubborn, but they really don't know, because We only know what we feel if we have a parent asking us and helping us articulate our inner experience. So when you think of an avoider, how are they wounded in their childhood? Often it's not huge trauma, it's just a lack of emotional connection. They're wounded in their childhood because they lack self-awareness. No one really asks them how to describe their internal experience. They're wounded in their childhood because they have no words for emotions. They're wounded in their childhood because they have no idea how to come into relationship to receive mercy. When I had my miscarriage, I had no clue or no natural instinct to go to a person. I had a natural instinct to draw away, and avoiders will draw away if the pain in their life finally breaks through. And it took a lot to make pain break through for me, because most of the time I just was very even, and that's why you all marry avoiders, because we're just so steady and predictable until you find out we don't even know how to connect, and then you get irritated with us. So avoiders are wounded in their childhood in these ways, and in turn, then, we wound others. Rick has a great saying, wounded people wound people. And we're just going to describe exactly how that happens. But think about this. How does an avoider then wound the partner that they're married to? Or wound their children? Or even maybe wound someone that they work with in a church environment? Well, we don't know how to connect. We don't know how to see a mess and move into it. We're going to run away from a mess if we're an avoider. We're going to try and quickly fix it and make it go away, or say things like, you're fine, don't worry about that, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's no big deal. So avoiders wound their spouses by minimizing anything that they're going through. They don't know how to comfort their spouse when their spouse has an emotional need. And they don't know how to really ask questions and listen to what goes down deep in a person. So these are all ways. Would you add anything to that?
Well, they don't know how to look down deeply into another person because they don't know how to look deeply into themselves.
That's right.
And so we could say with the story of the Good Samaritan that the first two that passed by and ignored the wounded man on the road, the Levite and the priest, they were emotionally avoidant. They had no compassion for what they saw down there. They chose not to see it. And so avoiders, and by the way, this isn't about gender, avoiders, male or female, lack empathy for others. And that's why they want to fix it, or they would just want to throw a principle or a verse or something at you to just say, get over it, you're going to be okay.
So when you think about mercy and the model of Jesus, and mercy being someone who's willing to enter the mess in another person, or invite someone to enter their mess, how are avoiders going to do it that? Not very well. Mercy wasn't even on my radar in the first 15 years of our marriage. I didn't even understand it. I'd never experienced it. And how can you value something that you've never really experienced? So for the avoider, they're going to have to receive mercy, receive comfort, receive someone accepting them and loving them and being curious about them. And they're going to have to be willing to open up to that experience. And we're going to talk more about the growth goals in a little while.
Have you ever seen an avoider before? Raise your hand if you've seen one of these people. Okay, good. See them, they're all over the place. Everywhere we go, we see them. And they all have the same answer. Fine. Okay. Now, listen carefully. Does that resemble Jesus? Was he emotionally avoidant? Did he just want to fix stuff and be on his way? No. Was he dismissive and minimizing? No. But do we have to stay stuck right here? No. This is what's called sanctification. God wants us to grow up. Listen to this beautiful verse by the Apostle Paul. I know it's in here someplace because I just saw it a minute ago. In reference to your former manner of life, lay aside the old self. Now he's writing to Christians. These are people that already know the Lord. But he's saying, in reference to your former manner of life, lay aside the old self and put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God and has been created in righteousness and holiness and the truth. Kay is no longer an emotionally avoidant person. It's because she made a choice to grow up and put aside that old self. And I helped you and you helped me. But I'd have to say the very thing that was your early wound of not wanting to of not wanting to look and engage, and your mom trying to get into your, what I kind of role played up there was really real. The thing that was so hard for me to accept about her was that the averted gaze. She didn't need to look at me. She didn't need to see me.
I didn't even need him.
She didn't even need me, really.
Avoiders are raised to take care of themselves.
Well, she needed me to have children, but she
That's
didn't really
about it.
need me. But we've already been through that, okay? But she didn't need me for the emotional kind of support.
No, I learned not to need.
That's right. So if there's no needs, how do you have mercy even being needed or applied or given? How do you have it? You don't.
Only needy people need mercy.
Until we knew what was broken, we didn't know what needed to be fixed. By fix, I mean we didn't know what needed to be sanctified. But we don't have to stay stuck here.
Right.
I grew up, I was the pleaser, okay? This is a second category, the pleaser. I came from a home where there was criticism and anger and volatility in the home. Scared me to pieces. I was paralyzed all the time in fear, not knowing what was going to happen next. Do you think I wanted to look into messes? No, I wanted to get away from messes because I just wanted them to go la, 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 go away. Okay, that's the home I grew up in. Sometimes people become pleasers because they grow up in homes where they have a wild family and they become the good kid. And so they want to be the kid that's the responsible one and the one holding everything together. But do they really want to peer into their own pain and the pain of others? I was so focused on people out there as to whether they were okay, which is how I was trained to grow up. I never stopped to look at me. I was always looking at my home to see if there was going to be an explosion. I was always trying to see what the winds were going to be, if there was going to be a storm in my house before or after dinner, whether I was going to be able to go to sleep at night and be okay and not be frightened. So when I planted a church here in the Saddleback Valley, there were two church planters in the Saddleback Valley in the late 70s and early 80s, a Rick guy and a Milan guy. I now go to the Rick guy's church. And I'm grateful for that. How do you think being hypervigilant and worried about everybody's emotions did to me as a church planter? What do you think that did to me? Think I was exhausted at the end of 10 years? I was exhausted and I had no idea what was wrong. And so that was my background. I didn't even know it was there. I had great intentions, but I didn't have the emotional wherewithal to run the race. And so like Kay said, we took a break from ministry to grow up. And so let's look at the pleaser then. How they are wounded. They're wounded in such a way that they want to be nice to keep messy emotions at bay. If you have messy emotions, they're going to want to make you cookies or do something nice for you so that the messy emotions will go away. They'll try harder to be nice to you and minimize difficult emotions. They're not going to bring up yesterday's bad news, so they won't bring up any problems and readdress them. They will focus on the needs of others, and if you ask them how they are doing, they don't know how they're doing. They're so busy looking at you to make sure you're smiling. My nickname used to be Smilin' Milan. Why? Because I would smile so you'd smile, because if you smiled, then I'd be okay. You get that? Then I'd know I was okay. I don't smile very much anymore. I smile when I want to now. And I don't smile when I don't want to. They're easy to be ignored as a child, and so they are very unaware of themselves. Self-awareness is low. How do they wound other people? Well, they will be nice to you. I'll be nice to you. I'll be loving toward you, but it's not purely for you. It's to reduce my own anxiety, okay? They can't tolerate difficult emotions, and they're going to want to make difficult emotions go away very quickly by trying to do something to repair them, especially anger. Do you think I wanted to enter into a room where there were angry people or an angry person? coming from a home where there was explosions and anger. I basically took a vow that I didn't know I was taking, which said, I'm not going to participate with anger. How realistic is that in an adult world? Not so. Now that's what I do for a living. I work in a world where there's lots of emotions, all kinds, and I'm now comfortable in them. I had to make myself learn to be that. They pretend a lot. They avoid reality. They're not honest. They could be dying inside, and you ask them how they are, and they're going, I'm doing pretty good. How about you? That's what we say these days, chew. How about you? They'll go, boom, boom, and they'll deflect right back onto you just about that fast. And they don't know what they want, and they don't know what they need. If you ask them where do they want to go for lunch, what do they say? Wherever you want to go. Because there's not a strong sense of self. Would you add to that?
Yeah, the pleaser is anxious inside, but they don't know they're anxious. Now, they've been anxious for so long. I mean, I didn't marry him and realize he was anxious at all because he hid it very well. He hid it as a child. No one ever asked him as a kid, how is this fighting affecting you? So there was not really an awareness inside you of what you felt at all.
Oh, I
now,
had
you might
no
say,
clue.
This sounds just like the avoider. Well, they are alike in that neither one of them want to enter into anything very messy. So how long do you think it took us to have an honest conversation? About 15 years. The difference is, if someone's mad at me as an avoider, well, they'll get over it. I could walk away and be fine. I don't really care if someone's mad. That's their problem. If he encountered someone angry as a pleaser, that really undid him. That really made him feel anxious and upset. So a lot of times we just tell pleasers to notice how anxious they are, and it's kind of a new awareness for them that anxiety drives a lot of their behavior.
I never stopped to contemplate how upset my stomach was all the time, how preoccupied I was about others' feelings and emotions, how much relief I felt when everybody was laughing and happy. And if there was a stern face in the crowd, I was immediately undone. I'd start to feel you talked about your body feeling stuff. I'd start to feel my heart race. I'd start to feel a queasy feeling in my stomach. I'd start to struggle breathing. I'd take deeper breaths. Sometimes you still hear me do that to this very day. Why are you breathing so deeply, Milan? And the odds are it's because I'm stressed. But then she can give me mercy right there because we know each other well now. And I'm less so of what I used to be. I had to put off that old man and choose to put on something different. I had to say, does the pleaser resemble Jesus? Somebody that won't bring up bad news? That wasn't a very fast no. Did Jesus bring up bad news? Yes, he did. What's the gospel? It starts with bad news. We're separated from God by sin. I had to get to the place where I could tolerate bad news, bring up bad news. Bring up bad news from last Tuesday. How's that going with you? And I had to get braver at that. Again, this isn't about gender. This is about our early experience right here where self, other, and we was developed. In implicit memories, a lot of body feelings, body memories. The body does not forget these early experiences. How you feel in certain relational settings. When all these feelings start coming up on the inside, were determined before you ever could remember stuff with your left brain called explicit memories. Kate, let's move on to the vacillator.
Okay, the vacillator is usually raised in a home where there's some connection, and it's great. And so that child likes that, and they want more of that. And the trouble is it's more based on the parent's mood than it is really on the child's need. And so the parent can wait a long period of time before they really engage with the child on that level again. So what this does inside the child is it makes them feel like, well, I want more of that. How am I going to get more of that? And so they're always watching for a parent to be available and hoping and waiting and hoping and waiting for some time and some attention. So we might say they grow up in homes where there's inconsistent connection, and their longing for more gets turned on high. They're called needy kids. My kid needs a lot of attention. Well, some kids do need more than others, but this kid needs more because they're not really getting it on any regular basis. It's very inconsistent. My dad was a vacillator, and we could have a lot of fun with him, and he was really available and playful, and then his mood could shift like that very quickly, and you just knew when he walked through the door what kind of mood he was in and whether anything good was going to happen or not. And more often than not, he didn't connect. So that longing for more is inside the vacillator. Now, what they do with that is they idealize the future. Vacillators are the king and queens of hope. And so they decide when they get married and when they have a family, it's going to be very different. And so when they're dating, they tend to idealize the person that they're with because, this is what they long for, this consistent time and attention. And when you're dating, there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of time, there's a lot of attention. And so well, I made it. This is so unlike my childhood home. I have arrived at the place where someone really sees me and gives me consistent connection. But then you get married, and you have to, you get a job, you have a few kids, and you have to wait. And waiting is a big trigger for vacillators. When they wait, they feel like, when is that going to happen again? And they start to get anxious about, is somebody really going to see me? Am I really going to have time? Are they really going to connect with me? And they're preoccupied with those thoughts of connection and disconnection. And their goal in life is to get more and make it ideal. Why do they want everything ideal? Because if it can be ideal, then they don't have to feel any of their childhood pain. Now, when they get married, they think that you are the one that causes them pain and you are the problem, and we could fix you, I'd be fine. So when someone comes into our counseling offices, if a vacillator's in the mix, we know they are probably the ones that made the call and that they want us to fix the other person. And they often don't see that they have a step in the dance as well. So when you think about how is a vacillator wounded, they're wounded in several ways. That longing to turn their connection on high, that's a wound inside them. Almost all vacillators have abandonment in their background. Sometimes it's very blatant, and a parent divorced or left or they suffered a death. Sometimes their parents were present but not engaged. They were in the house, but they weren't present with the child. Now, this is how my dad was. He was home a lot, and then later on when I was 17, he did leave my mom. But for those years that he was there, it was very unpredictable as to when he was going to be present or when he was going to be engaged in something else. So for the vacillator, the wound is about getting your connection turned on high and feeling like it's never really enough to satisfy. Would you add anything to that as far as the wounds?
Yeah, they're wounded, and just like all of us, they're wounded and they have no awareness they're wounded.
Yeah.
I was on blood thinners once, and it didn't take much to get a little cut or something, and then it would just bleed. And so here I am moseying around the office, and somebody said, "Hey, you're bleeding." There's blood trails all over the place. I didn't know I was wounded, you see. And so the avoider, the pleaser, the vacillator, the controller, the victim, we're going to find out they don't really know they're wounded. They think that their reference point and the reference plumb is square. Mm-hmm. And they don't see the wound. And so for all of us, but especially the vacillator, the ability to self-observe, self-reflection, right, introspection, self-reflective skills are non-existent as a starting spot. Right. That can change, but so they don't see that. So that's why in your point that you just made, if they feel bad, they think you made them feel that way. They don't get the fragility on the inside that causes them to feel that way.
Vacillators also do a lot of rehearsing and reviewing. And what I mean by that is they think about things that are coming up before they ever happen. Like even maybe coming here today with your spouse. If you're a vacillator, you might have been thinking things like, "Oh, I sure hope my spouse gets where they're messed up. I sure hope, they might not though. Well, how am I going to feel if they don't? Oh, I don't even want to think about that, but, oh, wow. Maybe they won't, well, I don't know. A lot of rehearsing. And then after this event, they'll go home and review. And they'll think about what happened and what they said and how did it come across. And especially if they're in social interactions, they'll go home and review all the things they said and did. And did it come off stupid? I wish I wouldn't have said that. So they're in their heads a lot. If you ask them, they'll say, I'm always analyzing. But what it is they're always really feeling anxiety about what is going to happen and what just happened. So we call that a preoccupied state, and they're preoccupied a lot. As I grew to know my dad better, he was preoccupied about a lot of things, about work, about the unhappiness in his marriage, about the affairs he was having, about when he could get his next drink. There was a lot of things preoccupying his mind. So vacillators, how are they going to wound others then? Well, they're going to put their idealistic perfectionism on you. And they're going to want you to create an environment for them that is really idealistic so they don't ever have to feel pain. Now, they don't really know they're doing this.
Right.
But vacilators are constantly disappointed. So if you're living with a vacillator, you're probably going to feel that. I can never do it right. It's never good enough. And the vacillator doesn't really realize their standard is too high. And it's about avoiding the pain of their past and never feeling that feeling of abandonment. So how else do they wound others? They're moody. A vacillator, when they're ideal and things are going the way they hope, they can be the most fun, the most vivacious, the most connected, the most interesting people. And when you disappoint them, their mood can change on a dime, and they're likely to protest and get very angry about whatever you said or did, and also tell you every time you ever did it before, because they've been preoccupied about that and thinking about it anyway. That's why they have laser memories. They remember because they've been thinking about it. So for the vacillator, they're going to wound other people with their anger. And they don't really realize they're wounding other people because after they get angry, they actually feel better. Vacillators don't realize the buildup of anxiety in them builds, and then there's just this threshold and they get angry. You know, when I'm a vacillator and I'm preoccupied and I'm thinking about Bible study and why that person said what to me, and my kid comes up and says, Mommy. I'm like, what? I'm trying to solve this in my head. So they don't often realize that their anger really hurts people in their family, but when they explode, they actually feel, they dump a boatload of anxiety. If you ask, they don't often know that that's what's happening. But they feel better. How do you think everybody else in the family feels? Worse. But everybody will just kind of like ignore that because if the vacillator turns into a good mood again, we're not going to bring that up and have another blow up. So the vacillator sort of dictates the mood of the family. Now, how are these alike and different? I just want to say this for a minute. Both avoiders and pleasers don't feel a lot of emotion and they don't like to enter the mess. I told you the difference is the avoider can be angry or disengage and they're not very affected, whereas the pleaser is very affected. The vacillator and the pleaser are a lot alike, and vacillators will please you to try and get connection. They want to connect, and they'll be very nice in pleasing you to get connection. But unlike the pleaser, when you don't give it or they're disappointed, they're going to get angry. Pleasers don't get angry till like midlife, when they're finally like, hey, how come nobody's giving to me? And then you ask them what they want, they don't even know. Vacillators get angry early on in the relationship. And then they might even look like the avoider. When they're mad enough, they'll just say, I'm going to go over here for a while and ignore you, and I don't care about you. This is protest over here. So sometimes vacillators are kind of a combination. They please, then they protest, then they may avoid, and then they kind of mosey back on in. But a lot of times that thing that happened, that explosion that just happened, is never really talked about. So there's really very little repair. So those are the ways that vacillators can wound others. So can vacillators really enter into the mess? Well, they'll be glad to enter into the mess in you and have you explore it so you can get better, but they don't understand there's a mess in them too. And they don't understand that they brought an imprint and a history into this relationship as well, and their sensitivity to abandonment is, like Milan said, it takes the littlest thing and they start to hemorrhage. It doesn't take much for them to feel like you don't see me, you misunderstand me, I feel invisible around you. These are all things that the vacillator often feels.
Well, and because of the abandonment issues in their past, gradually and insidiously, unbeknownst to them, something begins to grow inside of them that they're unaware of, and it's called shame. If I was abandoned, why was I abandoned? Why does somebody not want me? And so shame begins to develop. As one author put it, what began as a we, with time became me. And I feel these deep levels of shame. Shame is always developed in a we. Somebody ignores you, doesn't see you. The child begins to review and rehearse back then, and be preoccupied. And the other way that they hurt people then is because they're analyzing all the time, they come up with theories and rationale as to why you just did what you did. And so they wound others by blaming them or telling them what their intentions and motives are for the behavior that made them feel upset. Is that merciful? Does it work? No. Now, vacillators are some of the most empathic, sympathetic people on the planet, like you just said, unless they're upset at you. Then the curtain drops and there's none. It goes from all to nothing. Mm-hmm. But I think what you said is really important right there. Trying to reach the vacillator and say there's a little boy inside, there's a little girl inside that was reaching up for somebody and they didn't come and get them. Mm-hmm. That's where the pain of being ignored began.
Right.
And that's the place where mercy needs to be applied.
Right.
For you, the mercy needs to be applied from me to you in a place that I could see that little girl sitting on the edge of her bed all alone and nobody talking to her, nobody connecting with her, yet you're one of the most sensitive people on the planet. And connection is really important and you feel things very strongly. And for nobody to connect with you left you very alone. And then how did I need mercy?
You needed mercy for your anxiety.
What did I have to, what was that journey?
Well, I think for you, you weren't even aware that you had feelings that needed mercy.
Right.
And I think when you started to open up to me about what you were really feeling on the inside and, use some tools to help you discover that, it was easy to give you mercy. Mm-hmm. But I think you were so focused on other people that you never realized you needed it yourself.
Right.
And that there was some really painful childhood wounds in there that created your pleaser style.
Right. So when we began to understand these concepts and realize that we were conformed to the world through our familial imprint, and that we needed, in order to become more like Christ, we needed to take the parts of us. There were good parts in there. Your mom and dad did a lot of great things, so did mine. And we're not here to blame parents. We're here to explain who we are and why we're having a hard time. Does that make sense? We're not here to blame. We're here to explain why we're having a hard time. What's the reactivity in me that collides with the reactivity in her that causes this thing to take place? And if you're in a significant relationship with anybody, it could be your parents, it could be with a spouse or a close friend, work people, or it could be with your children. You know what I'm talking about. You just get close and boom, you start into a spiral. Pretty soon what starts off as a tropical storm ends up as Katrina. And you guys know what I'm talking about. Happens to all of us. Then there's another category. This is the last of the attachment categories. It's called the chaotic or disorganized attachment. This is a home where there is fright without solutions. The number of people in our society that grow up in highly fearful places as children, that don't know what's going to happen next, that are actually frightened, where there is abuse, neglect, where there is abandonment, literally, where the child isn't sure when they fall asleep each night whether they're safe or not, and they develop a day-to-day life and existence. It's, I wake up, I'm alive. I got to put food in my mouth, I got to find a way to get money, and I got to put food in my mouth, and then I'm going to put myself to bed, then I'm going to wake up the next day, aha, I'm alive. I got to put food in my mouth. I got to find money. I got to put food in my mouth. And so that's how they're shaped. They're shaped in very alarming families. A lot of these families, there's addictions. There's all kinds of difficulties, abuse, criminality. Sometimes even in the name of religion, there is such high levels of rigidity. There is wounding, even in the name of religion. And you guys read about this in the same papers I do and watch the same newsreels I watch of children who are hurt in religious homes because there is such a rigidity and strictness that is harmful to the child. There's a home where there is fright without solutions. And these kids that come out of a home like this will kind of flip into one of two modes, either a controlling person or a victim person. If a person is in this home and they say, look, I'm the kid, here's the parent, and this hurts, the controller says, guess what? In adulthood, I'm going to be the one on top. I'm going to be the top dog. I'm going to be the lead sled dog for the rest of my life, and I'm going to tell everybody what to do. I'm going to require compliance because it will be with compliance that I feel safe and my anxiety goes away. So what is the controller and how are they wounded? I already told you what they are. How are they wounded? So number one, they grew up in high stress situations and they got a lot of adrenaline going on the inside, and they're overwhelmed all the time. And they're easily overwhelmed if they think something is threatening or stressful. They've had to endure fear and terror, and so they are used to being frightened and intimidated and seeing a lot of things as threatening. They survived by being angry, by fleeing. They survived by fighting. And so they control others to keep others from making them feel undone on the inside. And as a child, they had no help with overwhelming emotions. So guess what they did to make their overwhelming emotions go away? What'd they turn to? Addictions. Addictions. I had a guy in my office multiple years ago. He said that when he was 13 years old, his dad handed him a bottle of wine and said, here, this will make the pain go away. 13 years old. And that's super common. How do they wound other people? They use anger and intimidation to make you do what they want you to do. And why do they want you to do what they want you to do? So that they're comfortable and not made anxious, fearful, or panicky. So don't go moving around a lot. Don't do anything unpredictable. Do precisely what we had planned. Don't go any curveballs on me. Nothing out of left field. If you do, bam, stop it. And they'll take the anger that really belongs to the past and they'll make it all come out on you because you're my nearest lightning rod. And their painful feelings that they have will be medicated so that they don't feel them anymore. Now, is it possible to be a Christian and still have these attachment styles? Of course. When you come to Christ, you're saved. God doesn't erase your C drive. You're a new creature, yes, you are in the eyes of God, but He doesn't erase your memory. He doesn't erase the history of who you are that we carry in with us to marriage and relationship. This is what sanctification's all about. I've made you perfect, co-seated at the right hand of God the Father, clothed in the righteousness of Christ. You could not be any more holy in my eyes. Now, grow up so you begin to look like that over time. Grow up so that you begin to match what I've already done for you. Would you add anything to how the chaotic controller wounds other people or hurts them?
When you think about the home of this kind of a person that they grew up in, there were very few, if any, positive feelings. Feelings were just a bunch of pain, terror, humiliation, shame, high levels of fear, anxiety. And so to them, feelings are something you just don't want to do. And if you get angry, it will cover all other feelings. They don't expect people to make them feel joyful or loving or happy, or those are just things that are very difficult for them to even understand because they just weren't a part of their childhood experience. And of course, all these exist on a continuum from mild, you can be a mild avoider, a mild pleaser, or you could be medium, you could be extreme. It really depends on what the environment was that you grew up in. But our hearts go out to this group because controllers don't know why they're so controlling. And it's really about staying away from their childhood pain. And the church is full of them because God so grieves for the childhood that they had, and he brings them into his family, and he wants to heal them. But we say your marriage is going to be as easy or as difficult as your childhood. Now think about that for a minute. If you had a really difficult childhood, then you weren't given any positive skills to take into your adult relationships. In fact, someone was just stirring up your little heart and causing enormous amounts of stress, and then shoving you out into adulthood probably before you were ready. So marriage is going to be harder. If you had a good background and you received a lot of mercy and you knew your feelings and emotions, it's going to be easier. So the controller mostly wounds people with their anger. That's the main way that they wound other people. But when you look underneath, which they don't want to do, there's a very wounded child inside of them. There's a wounded child in all of us. It's just a matter of degree. Because none of us had perfect parents. They don't exist.
Now, when we say wounded child, what do we mean by that? That sounds like a bunch of psychobabble. And I know some of you would think that, because I know some of you. But I happen to love Thomas the Train, okay? I'm a Thomas the Train fan, and I have grandkids. We have 9 grandkids. Had 8, just had the last one, so we have 9 grandkids. So we have a small family dinner. There's 19 of us at the house. Just got to know that. We go to Costco, Trader Joe's. It's a lot of money to have everybody over for dinner. So we don't do it that often. Anyhow, I love Thomas the Train. But you see, what I see here as I look at every one of your faces is the front end of Thomas the Train. What's true about you is you have a bunch of boxcars behind you. And each one of those boxcars, because you today are the sum total of all your history, I happen to have 66 boxcars behind the engine. And I have 66 boxcars, and somewhere back there is that little child you were talking about. The 1-year-old, the 2-year-old, the 3-year-old. The 4-month-old that's doing this, and she's back in that history. If we ignore her existence, I won't see all of you. To be merciful is to see all of you. And that's where we're going in this talk, because it's when I see all of her that some of the adult behaviors that I might not like, I can see that there is a backstory and I can have mercy for them. Does that make sense? All right. What's about the victim?
Okay, the victim grows up in the same chaotic home. It's just they survive in a different way. The victim is more probably the good little kid, and they just try and stay under the radar. They hide, they comply, they do their best to try and please an unpleasable parent. And another way of saying it is they learn to tolerate the intolerable. So the victim, that's, I would say, the greatest wound they carry is as a child, they learn to tolerate the intolerable. And the intolerable is almost now normal to them. I work in a prison ministry, and there's a lot of women who are either in this one or the other. They're controllers or they're victims because they grew up in very difficult homes most of the time. And so you say, well, why doesn't that person leave a spouse who's so abusive? Well, because they've already learned to tolerate the intolerable. So for the victim, they don't have a sense of self. It's not, no one was putting much good into them or telling them what they were good at or what they were capable of. It was just put downs and humiliation and shame and unmerciful teasing that's not really kind. These are the kinds of things that are endured. So when you grow up as a victim, how are you going to wound others? Well, you're not going to be very adult as a parent or as a spouse. Most victims just get stuck at a certain age. And often they repeat the pattern and they marry a controlling person, and then it's a repeat of their history, but they cannot protect the kids very well because they don't have a strong voice. They don't have a sense of boundaries. So it's very hard for them to stand up and protect their own children or stand up for themselves with a very angry spouse. And they'll tolerate way too much because after all, they learn to tolerate the intolerable, right? So in this home, mercy is just something that is unknown and unexperienced. Really, all these attachment styles or love styles block mercy. They block comfort, they block relief. And if we understand that, then we can begin to heal and work on those things. So, would you add anything to that?
You know, with each one of these, I ask people in my office all the time, especially when they're triggered and they're feeling very reactive, how old do you feel inside right now? And when you are just frozen with fear like the pleaser or the victim, or you feel so overwhelmed that you just have to get out of Dodge and flee like the avoider, or when you're angry and protesting like the controller or the vacillator, I ask people how old they feel right then, at that moment. And guess what I hear in my office every week? 9, 11, 5, 13. Because that's one of those boxcars where my feelings are kind of stuck in one of those boxcars. And to learn to coax those into the present so that the adult you can begin to take that part of you and help that part grow up. I remember saying to myself a few years ago, I finally feel like I'm 58 and 58. For those of you, that's when I was 58 is when I said that. I just want to make that clear. In case you didn't catch that. I finally feel 58 and 58. The inside feels like the outside. Wish I could have felt it sooner, but I didn't start this harder work until later. Now what happens, and let me give you a little bit of an idea of what we're doing for the rest of the morning. We're going to take a formal break
Not
in
yet.
22 minutes. What?
Oh, I was going to say we have.
We have more to do, I know.
Oh, okay.
I was just giving them a little heads up.
Oh, okay.
Which isn't on the script.
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not, but we're flexible and we can negotiate flexibility. Just checking to see if you're still with me. And we're going to take a break at 10:30. And we would love to have a couple come up here on stage and work with us, because what we're going to do is we're going to recruit a couple to come up here on stage with us and explore a little bit more about this topic that we're talking about, learning to develop mercy in your marriage. But what happens, Kay, if you put some of these combinations together?
Yeah, this kills mercy in a marriage too, because when you have two histories colliding, you're going to get an ugly core pattern. And all of you can describe the same fight you have over and over again, or the same topic you fight about over and over again. And no matter how many Bible studies you go to and how much you pray, you're still doing that nasty core pattern. And that's because you have two histories colliding and two reactive styles colliding, and a lack of skill development in some cases, things you just didn't learn growing up. So we're going to role play these, and you see if you can recognize something similar in your home.
Hey, I'm home. Hi.
Hi, I'm so excited to see you.
Hey, good.
I have something to show you.
Good.
Come here.
Hold on. Where's the mail? I got to find.
It's right there where it always is.
Sometimes you move it
I
around.
do not move the mail.
Okay, I'm looking for something.
You know what? I really want to show you something.
I'm looking for something from the bank because I got to sign it.
I
And
know.
we have to fax it before they close at 6.
Well,
So
okay, but no, that's not really true, because you always look at the mail, no matter if it's just junk mail.
do you know what? Sometimes you throw important things away. It said
Oh
bank
my
on
gosh,
it.
I
So,
don't throw anything away, but
Are you sure?
I
I'm going
really.
to check the trash.
Oh my gosh.
My gosh.
Oh, you know what? Oh, wait. I'll become a piece of mail. There, now do you see me? Hello, I'm a piece of mail.
Maybe it's over
Oh,
here.
you know what? I'm not going to show you anymore. Forget it. I don't even care. I'm done. I don't even want to have dinner with you tonight. Okay, you're laughing.
Well, I wasn't done yet with my part.
Oh. Go ahead and finish up.
I know she lost it. Wonder if she'll want to have sex tonight.
Okay, what do you think he is?
Which attachment style was I?
Right, what am I? I'm all excited. I've been thinking about him coming home all day. I do have something really exciting to show him. Right. And then I'm disappointed. So you can see this is a nasty core pattern. It's the most common presentation to come into therapy. You can see why. As a vacillator, I just want connection. I just want him to see me, and how well is he going to do as an avoider? Not very well. Folks, that's a mercy killer in marriage. That core pattern will frustrate you, and it will manage you until you learn to manage it. And a lot of the growth is about helping each other out of, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay, which is the next one? Oh, okay.
She processes externally.
Oh, you're so
Hey, I'm
cute.
home.
Hi, honey. So sweet. Look at her. Isn't she so cute?
She is very cute. She is
I
cute.
just love her so much.
Are you ever going to look at me again by any chance?
Oh, honey, of course. I love you so much.
Well, I mean, like I used to walk in and be all over me when I'd walk in the door, and now you're just staring at the baby and rocking the baby.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Here, you want to hold her?
No, I just want to know why. I just want to know why, because it used to be us. Now, it's not us anymore.
Oh, don't get upset. I'll make your favorite dinner.
Don't try
Here,
and talk.
I'll just put her down.
Don't
Here.
try and talk me out of how I feel.
There, okay, she's over there now.
Don't think you can just fix this thing. I'm upset. It used to be us. We used to just come home and be so excited to see each other.
I baked some cookies today. I'll go get
I
you
don't
one.
want any cookies. I want you.
Okay, who am I? Who is he? He's a vacillator. He can't do the controller. We've tried, and he's too nice. It's true.
That was funny.
Every once in a while, I get one out.
That wasn't in the script.
Okay,
Hey, hi, honey, boo-boo, I'm home. How's it going?
good. You're kind of in my way.
Well, that's okay. What you doing?
I'm trying to figure out what to cook for dinner.
Oh, I love that recipe. Let's cook that together.
You know what? The kids have been wanting you all day. Why don't you go play with the kids?
I know. I'm just glad to be. How's it going? Are you mad at me?
No,
Are you sure?
no, I'm fine.
You kind of seem like a little something.
No, I just want to get dinner on the table.
Well, you're
Let
kind
me
of.
see. I don't know if I have
quick.
everything for that. Let me look. Oh, what are you doing?
I'm just seeing if we got that in the refrigerator.
I don't want any help.
Well, but I thought we could do something together.
Well, maybe later. Just go play with the kids.
Are you sure you're not mad at me?
Yes, I'm fine.
Is everything okay?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Okay. That's
Now
right
that-
out of our history.
That is nothing to laugh about. Why are you guys laughing at that?
Okay, who am I? Me. Who is he? Right.
The old K, the old Milan. Wasn't that nauseating?
It's like a chase scene. You know, the closer he gets, the more I'm like, oh, give me space. Give me space. To top it off, I was an introverted avoider. That makes it even worse. Because introverts process on the inside, they think through things internally before they say it out loud. So,
Okay, how many of you identified with something in those core patterns that you just saw? Raise your hand. If you look around the room. Okay, this isn't just a Milan and K little thingy. This is 70 years of attachment research brought down where the cookies are on the bottom level. Do you think mercy is going to just blossom and bloom in these kinds of scenarios? No. Good answer, but you didn't say that very loud or very convincingly. Do you think that mercy's going to blossom in all of this? No. Thank you. Way to go, Saddleback and friends. No. I love how you said it. These are mercy killers.
Okay, number 3. We want to show mercy to our spouse through self-examination. This is one of the most important ways you could ever show mercy to your spouse. We prayed a very brave prayer when he left the ministry. It's in Psalm 139, and it says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and see if there be any anxious way in me or painful way, and lead me in the way everlasting." That's one of the bravest prayers you could ever pray.
Yep.
It's a prayer God will for sure answer. You don't have any answered prayer lately? Pray that one. But the most merciful thing you can do for your spouse is to pray that prayer. Because what it's admitting is that I'm not perfect, I'm broken, I have things in me that contribute to the problems in my relationship. And when we're willing to look at ourselves and examine ourselves and let our spouse know we're doing that, they don't have to prosecute anymore. It takes the stress down in a relationship when one person will begin to own their stuff. And that's why I say, even if your spouse won't cooperate, if you start to own your own stuff, it will still shift the marriage dynamic because they will be relating to a new person that's no longer the same.
So Romans 12:1 and 2 says, "Be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." The word transform is metamorphosis in the Greek language. That's the New Testament is written in Koine Greek. And it's metamorphosis. And metamorphosis always involves growth, and growth is a struggle. Now, the caterpillar who transforms, or the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly, you've all heard this story, I'm sure, in somebody's sermon someplace, but the butterfly has to struggle out of the cocoon. If you rescue the butterfly and free it, it will never fly, because all the struggling helps to shape the body and extract fluids out of the butterfly so that it can emerge and fly. So the merciful thing to do is to allow the butterfly to struggle. And we had to struggle and watch ourselves struggle and watch each other struggle and love each other in the midst of the struggle as you emerged into something new. It wasn't easy.
It had to be okay to not be okay.
I like that. It had to be okay to not be okay with each other and in each other's presence.
That was a big shift at the 15-year mark, and it was very uncomfortable at first. No matter what style you are, growing out of it is going to require that you break every childhood rule that you learned that was not written on the refrigerator. In my home, the childhood rule was, don't show your feelings, don't be needy, figure it out on your own, get good grades, perform well. I had to break those rules in order to grow. I had to learn to feel. As an avoider, what did I need to learn to do to grow?
Okay, let's look at those growth goals then of each of these so that we could be transformed. The avoider.
I had to learn to identify feelings, and as simple as that sounds, I absolutely could not do it without a list of feeling words, which is in your packet, because we know all of you avoiders need that. We all need it, really. But I had to literally put that list of feeling words in my journal, in my purse. During conversations, we always had it out. And he would say, well, how do you feel about that? And I don't know. Now, avoiders don't like to feel incompetent. They thrive on competence. And they'll do a great job if you ask them to do something. So learning to know what you feel will make you feel incompetent because it sounds so simple. But it's really not when you were raised in a home to ignore feelings. So learning to develop a vocabulary and then to put words to that and tell someone else, and to actually get close enough to receive comfort and mercy, those were huge growth goals for me. Just being able to take in means I had to stop doing this and start doing this and looking at you in the eye when I was in pain. That was really hard.
Super hard.
So it was transformative, though. I mean, being an avoider is like being in a prison. God made have you ever seen a 3-year-old without feelings? Everybody has feelings when they're born. It's just what we're taught to do with them in our families that determine how good we're going to be at acknowledging feelings. And here's the problem. If you don't know what you feel, you don't know what you need. And this is so important because the next thing I had to learn was, well, what do I need? Oh, I'm supposed to have a need? Oh, neediness is pathetic. I don't want to have a need. But yet, did Jesus need in the garden? He did. He asked his disciples to be with him and watch in his most stressful moment. We're all needy. We all hit places in our life of pain. The Bible says in this world you're going to have tribulation, and guess what? Tribulation is usually painful. When we're stressed, we usually have difficult emotions. When we're stressed, we don't say we're happy, we're good, we're like cheerful. We're usually having difficult emotions. Well, what do you need when you're in that state? That was a whole learning curve for me to try and understand what that might be and how to put words to it. And probably the most important thing I learned to take was comfort, which was a brand new experience because I don't have any memories of comfort in my childhood home growing up. The other thing I had to do that's right along this line is learn to ask for help. Now, none of us really love that, but for an avoider, it's like excruciating. Because it's some sort of like, well, if I need help, that must mean I'm incompetent. Some of the hardest things I learned to do were to literally pick up the phone on a day that I wasn't doing well and call, if he wasn't available, call a friend, and I just stare at the phone and go, yes, no, yes, no. Because to pick it up and say, I'm really having a hard day was like something brand new for me. Now it's easy, but at first it was very hard.
So remember a little while ago when I said, from the moment you're an infant, before you can speak, that pre-verbal time where we call infancy, you have the development of self, other, and we. Did Kay need other? Did she ever look to other as the avoider? Was other important? Was other on her radar? No. Does God believe in other? The importance of other? Small groups. Yes. Amen. You know the first small group? The Trinity. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God has existed from all eternity as God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Even God isn't a loner. And so Kay, her normal posture was this, as the avoider. Her sanctification journey was she had to learn around and come close to be obedient to God and say, I need something. Oh, what does the Bible say about love one another, bear one another's burdens, comfort one another, encourage one another? How can I do all those things if you never tell me where you're uncomfortable and don't have any comfort? Or where you're unencouraged, or where you're disappointed? How can I ever?
That's a good word, unencouraged.
Unencouraged. I just made it up right
like
here
it.
on the spot.
It's good.
I was the hoverer. What did I need to learn to do? I need to learn to walk away and be alone like Jesus did. He was cool by himself, alone. He'd go for a little walk on top of the water, just to chill. I haven't been able to do that yet. But I had to learn to be okay alone, without approval. And you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. Opposite sanctification goals. Come close, learn to step away. But neither one of us knew how to be honest. What does the pleaser need to learn to do? The pleaser needs to learn to express your own feelings and hurts and needs. I didn't want to do that. I was afraid my bad feelings would push her away. As a pleaser who wanted people close, would I want her to go away? Would I? No. So if I gave her bad news, she might go away from me. So did I want to tell her any bad news about me, my life, my thoughts, myself? No. Yet it was unbiblical not to bring ourselves to one another with needs. And I was a preacher. I was a teacher. I had to learn to deal with and own. I had to learn to own one day, and I'll never forget saying to you, I was looking through some of my journals, and I realized every time I journaled, there was the word fear in there. And I came to you one day, and I said, it just dawned on me that I'm a fearful person. And I had to confess that to you. I had to tell you what the deepest, most raw, ugly need was inside of me.
You know what? I didn't say, well, oh, duh. Because he hit it very well. I really didn't know. And with most pleasers, you don't even know they're anxious. They don't even know they're anxious. So how would you know? But for a pleaser, admitting anxiety is a huge growth
It was
goal.
a big deal. I had to learn that nice isn't the thing that will fix the world. Jesus wasn't perpetually nice. Pleasers are perpetually nice. They don't confront. I had to learn to be present with pain and not fix it, to tolerate it, to tolerate discomfort. And then I had to learn that rescuing wasn't merciful. Rescuing was not merciful. Rescuing somebody from distress wasn't merciful for them, unless it was something that was life-threatening. Of course, I get that, okay? But pleasers are the ultimate rescuers. If your kid's wobbling, you're going to start wobbling because you're going to get dysregulated with them, and you're going to have to go out and grab them and settle them down so that you're settled down. The question is, why do we do what we do for people and for others? Is it for them or me? I learned how to be able to separate that by being honest with myself. What are the vacillator growth goals?
The vacillator needs to learn to realize that life isn't ideal
Yep.
and to bring ideal down to real. And I'm going to quote a vacillator. This is what she told me, and I love it. She said, every day now that I understand this, I wake up and I say to myself, today won't be as good as I think it's going to be. And she says, and I'm always right, and I'm always disappointed. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes, sometimes it takes a couple hours, but I'm always disappointed. But I've already told myself it's going to happen. Then when it happens, I tell myself something else. I say, this isn't as bad as you think it is. Because vacillators tend to go from all good to all bad. And when they're down here, everything is devalued. So one of the things they have to do is really start to be more aware of that swing between all good and ideal, disappointed and all bad, and go on a good hunt when it's all bad. Now, you think that's simple. When vacillators are mad and it's all bad, they don't want to see one good thing in anybody or anything. They just want to dwell on the bad. So it sounds easy. Just start to integrate. Okay, this isn't all bad. What's good here? Harder to do than you might imagine until you try it. I think vacillators can really grow by realizing their preoccupation and how it builds anxiety. Vacillators need help with the anxiety that precedes the blow-up. But they aren't really aware of the build-up. In fact, a lot of vacillators wouldn't even basically know they're anxious until they really start paying attention. But it never occurs to them. They just want you to know what they need and do it. And if you love me, you would just know. It's very hard for them to go and say, I've been really preoccupied all day. I'm fighting it. You know, I had a friend and something wonky happened, and I'm really struggling. I just am struggling with it going through my mind and what happened and what I should do. Could you just give me a hug and pray with me? I'm having a hard time quieting my mind down. That's a vacillator taking their anxiety to someone and asking for help before it turns into an explosion.
That would also mean they'd have to take down their shame shield and recognize it's there so that they could actually be vulnerable.
Yeah, vacillators will come into our offices saying, I want connection, I want connection, I want connection. But when you get this spouse to really learn to be available, now the vacillator's in a dilemma. Oh my gosh, I want it, but what if I take it? And then what if you abandon me? What if and they're scared right there. So sometimes they'll even sabotage the connection they really want because now they have to really take it in. Now, they'd rather complain it's not available than have it available and take it in. It's scary to take it in. So learning to really take it in is another growth goal. And then I would say we're just giving you 3. There's a whole workbook in the back of our book with a whole chapter just for the vacillator, just for the avoider. We're just giving you a small bit of the growth goals right now. The third one, or the next one would be, don't make your spouse a lightning rod for your past hurts. Vacillators need to look in their background and understand that the feeling they're feeling has a history behind it. And to own that history and begin to learn to get help and comfort for the pain that they suffered as kids, especially around the area of abandonment and feeling invisible and misunderstood. Would you add anything?
I think
It's 10:30.
we need to get ready for our break.
Let's just finish that and then we'll do the
You
break.
want to finish this?
Yeah.
All right. I said yes because I wanted to, not because I had to.
I'm so glad you made that clear.
You with me? And I'm not smiling, notice that. The controllers need to, if they want to grow up, the first thing they need to do, their favorite verse is forgetting what lies behind and pressing on toward, the favorite golf joke, that forgetting what lies behind and pressing on to the next hole. They just want to forget the past. They have no empathy for their hurt, their pain. The very number one thing that a controller and a victim need to do is embrace the pain of the past. Because until they have empathy for their own hurt and pain and journey, they'll never start a healing journey. They'll only be caught up in rage. Well, we could send this person to an anger management class and teach them how to control the rage, couldn't we? All right, count to 10, do all these things, deep breathing. All right, let's find some alternate places. Let's go to a happy place. What we're saying is we want you to go to a realistic place, the place of pain, and acknowledge it, because that's where the cross wants to do the healing. To take refuge in the words of Jesus, it would be better for a millstone to be thrown around a person's neck and them cast into the sea than to hurt a little one and to realize vengeance is mine, I will repay. Tears are the antidote to anger. Tears are the antidote to anger. I showed a very angry controller in my office a picture of a 4-year-old grandson. I said, look at him. This is the age you were when you were severely abused in scenario A, B, or C. I said, look at this. Because he would say, I got over it, I'm over it, I'm over it. I go, then why are you here if you're over it? Your anger is destroying your life. And I said, look at him, what do you see? He says, I see a little tender little boy, innocent, unable to protect himself. And for the first time in this guy's life in a long time, he got a tear in his eye. Because he all of a sudden had compassion for the pain that was there. Jesus died for his history, and for those that hurt him and harmed him, he died for their history too. And that would be the number one thing that all of us, but especially the chaotic, disorganized home, needs to do to grow up and learn to grow. Stop medicating yourself with addictive behaviors. You're going to have to deal with your addictions. The top 3 addictions are drugs, alcohol, and sex. Those 3 things, drugs, alcohol, pornography, those things for people from chaotic backgrounds are the things that make all the pain go away and distract me momentarily, temporarily. I'm distracted so I don't feel the pain. And if I don't get involved in some sort of an addiction recovery program, I'm toast, because the addiction is going to be what's driving the bus. But what's really driving the bus underneath the addiction? The pain of my past. Because I haven't faced it and resolved it.